podcast. It's your host, Sarah, and today we are going to honor Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, at least nationally in the States, through building together an example safety plan. So when I was younger, I had safety plans galore because obviously people with BPD are super high risk for attempting suicide and or completing. And, my team did not want that to happen to me when I was 18 and so forth. I haven't had an active suicide plan that was written out, carried in my wallet for many, many years, because at this point in my life, it's kind of plug and play, plug and play who the supporters are in my life at that time. But the other parts of my plan are still pretty consistent. But one of the greatest things that I can ask you to do for yourself is have a printed out plan in your wallet, in your backpack, tucked in your Stanley water bottle backpack, which is just, a capitalism hellscape. Nobody needs a backpack for their water bottle. I'm sorry. Have it with you because our phones, they can die. We can lose files. There is the executive dysfunction piece of input my password, try and find where I saved it. Did I take a screenshot of it, or is it in my Google Drive? Or is it in my notes app? Or did I text it to myself? All of that is too much. When you are suicidal and you need to use your plan, you need to have it easily on hand, pull it out, implement. The other piece of this is make a copy. Give it to somebody that you trust. Have everyone who's a supporter and on your kind of quote unquote team, and I don't just mean paid providers, but your supporters. These are people that we would call informal supports in the field of social work. They need to know what the plan is so that they can best support you, right? Because if you reach out in that moment, that's a highly vulnerable moment. And as people who have severe rejection sensitivity, it's the worst fucking thing you could possibly imagine to have someone in the moment, right? Like ninth inning, super important, bases fully loaded. That was a bad analogy. I might take that out. To have them not understand what the plan is and to have them fumble the ball. For parents, families, supporters, partners, friends listening, if you want to be the best support to the people that you love who have borderline and or any other mental illness that results in frequent suicidality, the most helpful thing you can do is know what the plan is and implement it with the person that you love with dignity, respect, clarity, non-judgment. All of that could make a huge difference in either helping your loved one keep on keeping on or not re-traumatizing them in that moment. And again, it's not your responsibility, right? Those of us with severe mental health issues, we do have the responsibility of trying to manage this ourselves. But if you sign up to be a supporter, be a good supporter. You signed up to be the partner, the friend, the solid good parent. It's your job to do that well if you're taking on that job. So there's going to be another episode labeled Staying Alive, featuring listener responses that talks more about suicidal statistics and warning signs and those kinds of things. This episode is only for the purpose of understanding what's in a crisis plan and giving you some context or some examples for how to build one. So building a safety plan is something that we should do when we're at our baseline so that it can be an objective plan to follow and not something that we build using our emotional mind, right? Because then it may not be accurate. Generally speaking, it's something that would benefit us to build with professionals, but I also understand that that's a privilege that not everyone has. The reason that I say that is like a professional just might be able to point out things that any of us might not notice, myself included. The safety plan should be short, simple, to the point. I have ADHD. You're hard pressed to get me to read a full fucking page unless it's bullet points anyways. But if I want to end my life, you better believe I need it to be short, sweet, to the point if I'm going to be able to read it, comprehend it, and apply it. So bullet points only. I love the highlighter tool. I use that in email and Word and assessments and whatever else because I want you to take your eyes directly to the most important thing. So there's typically about 5 steps in a safety plan, and you would go through them, generally speaking, if you're able to use the crisis plan sooner rather than later in a linear fashion. So we're going to talk about all 5. And I'm also going to have an example of this on my website. So boldbeautifulborderline.com is going to have a example as well as a PDF that you can download. It's in the blog, the most recent blog post. So go there if you're needing that resource. Okay, so just a brief overview of what the steps are before we go more in depth. So the first step is to identify what your warning signs are that you're going into crisis. The second step is to utilize your own internal coping skills. So that's not engaging other people. The third step is to reach out to those people who support you and use the external coping. That's what we call it, is external coping, because they would be helping you cope. The fourth is to contact family, friends, or professionals for support. And then the fifth is the emergency contacts that you would utilize to stay safe. So identify warning signs. This is step number 1. Generally, we would look at thoughts, feelings, or behaviors that could indicate that we are nearing crisis. This could be a day before, this could be an hour before, but this is just an indicator that tells you and or the people around you, hey, maybe we need to do some preventative work because things are not going well. So for me, that would be constantly thinking, I hate being here. I hate myself, my marriage, my parents. I hate everything. So that's severe hopelessness. If my mood swings are more significant than normal, and actually this one is really interesting, it's feeling really calm in the midst of all of that. I had an ex one time say, I knew that our breakup was the final breakup because you weren't hysterical, you weren't doing crazy shit anymore, you weren't crying, you were so calm and matter of fact. So for me, that's a dangerous thing when it comes to my kind of mental health and warning signs, is that the thought of suicide is no longer just a coping strategy. It's actually, this could be a threat. This could be real. And actually, it may sound funny, but suicidal ideation, passive suicidal ideation, is very much a coping skill for some people. And for me, it is. I have been ruminating on and thinking about suicide since I was as young as I can imagine. Those are some of my first thoughts. I'm 31, so obviously most of the time that wasn't actually going to go anywhere. That was just a way for me to imagine, okay, if I can just disappear, I will stop feeling this bad about myself. So in that way, it was a coping skill. It's not the most pleasant. Maybe it can be, dangerous in terms of leading to other more serious suicidal concerns, but it is very much a coping skill. And when your life is at risk, it's cope to cope. It's not, how do we have the best coping skills we can have? No, it's stay alive, motherfucker. I would rather relapse than die at this point. If what I have to do to stay alive is relapse, that fucking sucks. I hate that. That's not what I want for myself. But at the end of the day, if I get fucked up and have sex with everybody in this town, I'm going to wake up tomorrow. The next thing is I stop using my hygiene. Stop showering, stop brushing my teeth. I haven't exercised in a long time. I haven't taken my dog out. And then the final thing I would say is not answering messages or dropping the ball at work. Those are all signs that, okay, Sarah, we're not doing well. We need to really start implementing some coping strategies, because if this keeps going, the amount of shame that you will feel, the amount of self-hate that you will feel could be a legitimate risk to your life. Okay, number 2, utilize internal coping strategies. So these are the things that you can do on your own to distract yourself or cope with the suicidal thoughts. So for me, I'm not going to lie, I have a really hard time implementing internal coping strategies. I know that a big part of this is ADHD and the task paralysis, the executive dysfunctioning issues. I know that's why I have a higher rate of self-harm than a lot of people that I know and have for 20 years. It's something that I'm really working on. And just a reminder, self-harm is awful, painful, but it is not positively correlated with suicide. It's an attempt to cope and regulate. However, that is not something I am endorsing to be in the coping plan. So develop strategies that you can use on your own for distraction without needing external help. This is important because, suicidal ideation does not care if you are with your partner or your teacher or whoever. It can hit you often out of nowhere on your own, especially for me because of really deep, shameful thought. So examples of this for me: get out of your house, Sarah. Get up, get out. I don't leave my house very often. Even if it's just get out and get into my yard, sit in the sun, sit in the rain, go to a coffee shop, but get out of your house. Not because there's anything in my house that's super dangerous to me, but because a new environment can be very helpful. The second thing is my dogs, my cats, touch an animal, look at my plants, remind myself that I built a life where there's so many living things around me. And I really value the living things around me. The third thing, take a nap if I have to. 4, I purchased this thing called a Calmi, CALMI. I'm not going to lie, it's very expensive, but I was looking for something that would kind of utilize my oral fixation because of having been a smoker for so long. So a Calmi looks like an inhaler. It is a breathing device, but it has many different tactile and visual and olfactory sensation, sensory things. So when I breathe into it, I can smell the lavender. It will vibrate in my hand when I've breathed out, exhaled long enough. It has a little light that flickers. So it's very sensory pleasing to me. And I don't even realize then that I'm doing the deep breathing. And also it uses my oral fixation thing, right? I would love to be smoking right now, but I quit smoking January 1 of this year. So we're going to breathe into a goofy, expensive inhaler. You can probably use your health savings account money for that, I would imagine. And then the final thing for me is journaling. My journal is a wild, wild place, y'all. I don't, I hope when I'm 95 and I die, nobody finds these journals and reads them and is who the fuck was that bitch? Because I have some crazy things written in it that I have written when I was very angry, very sad, very suicidal. It doesn't really matter what you write as long as you allow some of these things to get out of your brain, out of your body, out of you. I really believe in the physical sensation of writing our thoughts and our feelings rather than typing them out, because you have to take a longer amount of time. You see them in front of you. You notice your handwriting. It's a very mindful, calming experience in that way. So I like to light my candles. I like to get cozy in bed. I like to do my journaling, and then I will try to take a nap, but I will distract myself by reading the news. Very strange. I read the news app on my phone for an hour, if not more, before I go to bed at night. But it's a nice way of turning off my brain and turning off my shame. And for me, shame is a huge risk factor. And oh my gosh, I forgot to mention the tip skill. Tip skill, so amazing. I literally cannot recommend building a cold plunge for yourself if at all possible. I know it's a lot of standing water. I know it can be expensive. There are very affordable ways to do it, but I cannot recommend it enough. My therapist, last year, was saying, Sarah, it's time. We need something that's accessible for you. Getting in and turning on the shower isn't easy enough. You just need to be able to take the thing off and get your body in. The tip skill, amazing. Okay, so if your internal coping strategies aren't working, totally okay. We go to step number 3, reach out to social contacts for distraction. So these people don't even necessarily need to know you're working your crisis plan. This is get out, spend time with someone else who can remind you you're loved, life is worth living, and or stay neutral. So identify people and places that can provide positive distraction, not necessarily to talk about suicidal thoughts, but to help shift focus. I don't have a ton of people in my life that I would actually express I'm feeling suicidal to that aren't paid supports. But I do have people I can reach out to, to try to schedule something. So back when I lived in Portland, my friend Krista and I would hike. I saw her maybe twice a year, but I've known her since I was a teenager. So if I was feeling suicidal, that would be a good person to reach out to, especially because her and I don't just hang out regularly. I don't do that with anyone. So we would be planning something for the future. The best thing that you can do when you're suicidal is have something on the books for the future. The next thing, my partner and I might go kayaking. I might go just sit at a coffee shop because there's people there to interact with, but specifically my husband works at a coffee shop here in town, so I know the front desk gal, she's so sweet. I know the head chef, she's so sweet. So those are social contacts for me that will be helpful in distracting me. And we're transitioning to step number 4. So step number 4 is where the crisis plan kind of transitions from internal coping and managing distress independently and without necessarily notifying anyone, because you are capable of doing that. This step is about, okay, I'm starting to notice my coping isn't working. My brain is kind of telling me some dangerous things. I might be transitioning from passive suicidal ideation to more planning or intent, which is when we need to have supports who are aware of this, who can help keep us safe. Especially because I don't want you to end up in the hospital. The hospital can often be very triggering or traumatizing for people. But if it's what you have to do to stay alive, then that's what we want for you. But that is ideally the very last step. So contact family, friends, or professionals for support. I have 3 people on this list. I have Talon, my husband. So on the actual crisis plan, these things would be in bullet points that we talked about in steps 1 through 3. In step 4, I would have my husband's name and I would have his phone number. And I might also have his work phone number in case I can't get a hold of his cell phone. The next 2 people I would have are my therapist, Jennifer, and my psychiatrist, Megan. I would have both of their phone numbers listed. My therapist and I have an agreement that if there's anything that is a crisis and I need her, I will text her and she will call me within the hour. Unless she is unable to do that because she's out of town, in which case she always has a backup clinician listed. I'm one of the clients that she talks to about that because I'm one of the more high-risk clients. That's okay. And then my psychiatrist, I can reach out to as well. There have been times in the past where I have done this and I have gotten in for an emergency therapy and in an emergency psychiatry appointment where I had my medication adjusted. When that happened last, we added in lithium. Lithium has been a life changer. It is the only FDA-approved medication to treat suicidal ideation. I did not realize that. I think a lot of people don't realize that. Helpful tool. I only have 3 people on this list. You might notice I don't have any family or friends on this list. That's because I have a deep love for my people, but I do not trust my people to be able to navigate this effectively with me without feeling severe shame, fear of rejection, guilt, fear that they just won't pick up or respond. If you have a more secure relationship with your parents or your friends, put them on this list, write their name down, write their phone number down. Again, if your phone dies, you won't necessarily have that available to you. I have 2 phone numbers memorized. 573-3549. That was my childhood phone growing up. 1 phone, by the way, and you couldn't use it if you were on the internet, at least until like the mid 2000s. But I digress. Write their names down, write their phone numbers down. If you are not able to get a hold of these people and or they don't feel like they can safely support you, the last step is to utilize your emergency contacts. I don't want you to get to the place where you have to utilize emergency contacts, not because there's anything wrong with it, but because I don't want your body to go through that much distress. So this is why working the steps and having a crisis plan is actually essential for our health. So I would have listed, again, in a linear fashion, kind of the steps that you could take before hospitalization. So the first could be a warm line. There is a National Mental Health Association peer-run warm line. The phone number is 1-877-500-9276. I will have that included in the show notes. There's also state-specific warm lines that you can research. Just plop that into ChatGPT and you will find it. The next is the crisis text line. Often people find that like super helpful because they don't have to speak with anyone on the phone. So the crisis text line provides 24/7 support by people who are trained crisis counselor. You can text HOME, HOME, to 741-741. And that's available actually in the US, Canada, the UK, and Ireland. The next would be 988. So this is the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It's a 24/7 confidential hotline that offers support with emotional distress or if you're experiencing any kind of crisis. Those folks are trained crisis counselors as well. So the next part is really important. This would be if those services are not beneficial and you still feel like your life is at risk, or other people feel like your life is at risk, the hospital. So for me, this is kind of tricky because I am a licensed clinical social worker and I do work with local hospitals. I don't want to experience going to a hospital and being suicidal and needing treatment with my peers. That does not feel safe to me. I don't feel like I will get the support and the care that I need. And also that could make my suicidal ideation worse because of shame. So for me, I would have a different hospital listed. For me, this would be actually, it's quite a far drive. It would be out of county. However, it would, 1, give me the distraction of being in the car with my husband for an hour and a half. And 2, being at a hospital where I actually feel safe because I don't work with people in that county for mutual cases. I would have written down my first preference for a hospital, the name, the phone number, and the address. And just a reminder, this is your crisis plan. It does not matter what other people think of your crisis plan. You are allowed to have written down the hospital that you feel safest at, and you are allowed to tell people who are supporting you, this is the hospital that I need to go to. Now, you may not always have that ability if you are being transported by, emergency services, but it is important that your family and friends know, your providers know, the hospital that you want to go to, the hospital that you feel safest at. And maybe it's the hospital that's in network with your insurance too. There are things like that. Okay, these are generally all of the steps. In your county, you may have like a walk-up mental health clinic or something like that you can also put in step number 5. But those are kind of the standard resources that you would have in the 5th step. The last part of safety planning is once you have developed your crisis plan, you have to give copies to your people and talk through it with them. Say to them, if I am at a place where I'm really unsafe, this is what my crisis plan is, and this is how I need you to use it with me. Not want you to use it with me. Need you to use it with me. I'm speaking to the people that are not, the ones in crisis. You are responsible for supporting your person in a person-centered way based on what they need and what they want. Even when you're unsafe, you still get to have wants. You still get to have preferences. It's not keep them alive at all costs, because that can actually result in more trauma if they are not getting supported the way they need. So I just want to leave you with my final reminder, which is prevention is trauma-informed care. If you have a plan, it will be so much easier to stay alive. And just remember, there's things around the corner. Like, I have a fuckload of national parks to still visit, and I have to remind myself that on the days that I don't want to do this shit anymore. I have a dog who I love, who I got in a divorce. She's the only thing I got in a divorce, who I'm here to take care of. I have plants that I want to propagate and watch grow. I am going to build the fucking greenhouse of my dreams. I have places to still snowboard. I have art to still do. I have humans to still connect with. There are hair colors I have not yet done. There's things still waiting for me. There's things still waiting for you. A crisis plan will help you get there. Hello, listeners. Thank you for tuning in to the Bold, Beautiful Borderline podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your content. That's super helpful for me in finding additional folks who want to listen to the show, want to feel seen, family members, partners who want to understand. You can also follow along at Bold, Beautiful Borderline or at Sarah's Wellness Way on Instagram. For the blog and a more extensive list of resources, go to boldbeautifulborderline.com. There you can also request to be a guest on the show, or you can do my favorite thing and leave a voicemail to be played at one of our future episodes. All of this information can be seen below in the show notes. If you'd like to support the show and get exclusive perks, consider becoming a Patreon member. Your support helps me with creating content to destigmatize BPD and all the other wild mental health struggles that I discuss on this podcast. As always, thank you so much for guests and listeners alike. I love you. Until next time, keep living and seeking joy. Information in this podcast is not medical advice, but rather experience from individuals living with mental illnesses. If you want to try a treatment that you heard about, please consult your treatment team. The music in this podcast was created by a longtime friend of mine, Corey Evans from the Evergreen Band. You can find him on Instagram at @the_Evergreen Band. Cover art was created by my husband, Talon Abbott. Their information is in the show notes. There is no producer for this show. It's all me.